Fuzzy Mud, Chapter 10. Wednesday, November 3, 2:26 a.m. Tamaya slept. Marshall did not. As much as Chad had tormented him, he tormented himself even more. He lay in bed, desperate to fall asleep. He knew he'd have to be alert to deal with Chad, but sleep seldom comes to those who are desperate for it. It is something that has to be eased into gently. He'd gotten in trouble for coming home so late from school. He was supposed to have looked after the twins, and when he hadn't shown, his dad had had to leave work early. The only way we can afford to keep you at Woodridge is for everyone to do their part, his father had reminded him. Good. I'll go to another school then, Marshall had answered. I hate that place. It didn't make any sense to Marshall. If his parents couldn't afford it and he hated it, then why not let him go to another school? But that argument only made his parents angrier. Then, on his way back to his room, he had accidentally stomped on the twins' hippo village, which had just caused more yelling. You're lucky I didn't step on you, he had told Daniela. The whole thing was his parents' fault, Marshall decided. His birthday was September 29, and back when he was 4 years old, his parents had had to make a choice. Either he could start kindergarten as one of the youngest kids in the class, or he could wait a year and be one of the oldest. If they had waited, he'd be older, bigger, and stronger, and Chad Hillegas wouldn't even be in the same grade. How many members are in the U.S. Senate? That was the question Mr. Davison had asked Chad. 29? Chad had guessed. Andy was the one who had laughed, not Marshall. How can there only be 29 senators, Andy had pointed out. There are 50 states. But then Mr. Davidson had said, Marshall, will you kindly tell Chad how many senators there are? Right then, Marshall had known he was doomed. He had considered giving a wrong answer, and maybe he should have. But who knows? If he'd said something like 28 or 1,000,000, Chad might have thought Marshall was mocking him. Instead, what Marshall had done was stare down at his desk and very quietly say, 100, I guess? It was only a short time later that Chad had nearly thrown him down the stairs. We need to settle this once and for all, and you better be there, you thumb-sucking coward. Now, as he lay awake at 2:30 in the morning, Marshall tried to convince himself that since Chad had finally beaten him up, he wouldn't bother him anymore. They had settled it once and for all. Except he knew the opposite was more likely. Now that Chad had tasted blood, he would come back for more, and he would come after Tamaya too. He imagined walking to school with her. She's yammering away about Monica or Calvin Coolidge or something, when Chad grabs her hair, spins her around, and punches her right in the face. Leave her alone, Marshall shouts. Tamaya's on the ground, crying. Chad is about to hit Tamaya again, but Marshall grabs his arm. I said, leave her alone. Chad shoves him. He shoves Chad back. A crowd gathers. Chad comes at him with all he's got, punching wildly, but Marshall holds his ground, ducking and hitting back. At first, Marshall hears everyone rooting for Chad, but as the fight continues, he starts to hear a few of his old friends root for him. Get him, Marshall! You can do it, Marshall! And then, as Marshall tried to fall asleep, he imagined the fight ending in different ways. Sometimes he was the winner, leaving Chad beaten and bloody, begging for mercy. Other times, Chad won, but only after a long, hard-fought battle. He envisioned himself lying on the pavement, barely able to move. Two pretty girls from his class, Andrea Gale and Laura Muskrantz, kneel by his side and tell him how brave he was as they dab the blood off his face with wet paper towels. Laura kisses his cheek. But even as he imagined all this, he knew it would never happen. If Chad attacked Tamaya, the best he could hope for was that a teacher would break it up before Tamaya got hurt too badly. Then, maybe Chad would be expelled. And then maybe after Chad was gone for a while, the other kids would like him again. That was his best hope, and he hated himself for it, because he knew it was the pathetic hope of a coward.